Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Truth in the Barrel Unfiltered. Today, I'm alone and unafraid, talking to you about Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth's bonkers speech this week to 800 generals and admirals that they summoned from all over the world. And we'll also talk about the real impacts of the government shutdown. I'm Amy McGrath. Please make sure you're following us on social media, whatever platform you use. Friend us, follow us on the places like YouTube, and be part of this conversation. So leave us some comments, some questions, and we'll get to them. All right, let's get started. 24 years in the military. I have never seen or heard of anything like this before. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth summoned all of the 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star generals from around the world to Quantico, Virginia for a meeting. At first, we never knew what the meeting was even about, and even the generals and admirals did not know what the meeting was about, which that in and of itself is bonkers. After a while, and there was criticism about this meeting because nobody knew what it was about, then the president decides he's going to now talk to the generals and admirals. Okay. So then they decided to make it live, as we do in the Trump era. Everything is on live TV. So the American public got to listen to the Secretary of War, the Secretary of Defense, dress down the 800 generals and admirals, our top folks in the military, followed by a speech from the president. And I have to just say, both of those speeches were super bizarre. This was a show. It was a performance. It had nothing to do with readiness. It didn't make our military more lethal. It didn't make us safer, because none of this was about defense. And the one thing, well, there's several things that I took away from this speech. The biggest one was that there was no talk of any coherent foreign policy at all during this speech. It was just this rambling mess from not only the Secretary of War, but also from the president himself, and especially from the president himself. So there's four things that I really took away. One, tons of lies. The president, as usual, spewed a bunch of lies, and we're going to go through those here at the end of this podcast. The second piece was the blatant politicization of the military in ways that I have never seen. Certainly not in my lifetime. I don't think, and I'm somebody that studies history, I can't even think of politicization of the military like this in the last 100 years, maybe even in American history. When the president gets up there and basically gives a political speech to the military, that is politicizing our troops. That is eroding trust in the institution of our military and its leaders. And I've never seen anything like that than what we saw this week. Plus, the third thing is the craziness of the president's speech. His talk about, oh, your ships in the Navy, you're so ugly. They're so ugly. I mean, it's bizarre. He ranted about the types of paper being used. I guess he's upset about the paper being used. You get promoted and you get a piece of paper that says you're promoted. He had a rant about the Department of War, changing the Department of Defense's name to the Department of War, and that somehow is going to be the answer to winning all the wars of the future. It's laughable and crazy. I mean, anybody that's been in the national security world knows that kind of stuff is just bizarre. But the scariest piece to me was not all of that. We're so used to Donald Trump's lies by now. We shouldn't be used to them, but we are. Unfortunately, we're getting used to the politicization of the military, and the craziness is always around us. But the scariest piece of this speech was Donald Trump's words of using the military to fight this, quote, invasion from within. You hear this on the campaign trail a lot. We've been invaded from within. But to say it to the military, implying that the military then will be used to go after enemies inside our country, meaning Americans, using our cities, he said, as training grounds for the military. That to me was a WTF moment. That is not what we do in America. That is not what we do with our military. And when I heard that, that was like, okay, this isn't just a crazy, bizarre speech. This is really scary. Okay. And now if you take a step back, just bringing all of those 800 generals and admirals to one place was an unnecessary security risk. I've talked about that. It's expensive. It's disruptive. It was a complete waste right before a government shutdown. Right before a government shutdown. You would think that the president would be trying to negotiate at that point and not going all the way to Quantico to give this just bizarre speech. Why is it a big operational security risk? You don't bring the top generals and admirals, the leaders of your military, all into one spot. It's like military 101. From a military perspective, it's dumb, right? It's just a security risk. It's an unnecessary security risk. In all of the wars that we've had in the last 24 or 30 years, we have instituted secure methods of communicating. We spent a lot of money to have this technology precisely so that we would never have to bring all of these generals and admirals together in one spot, precisely so they wouldn't have to travel this way. So if you're going to bring everybody together, you don't tell the world you're doing it. That's also kind of like a red flag. It's also very expensive flying everyone back here. When this administration keeps talking about fraud, waste, and abuse and wasteful spending, and we need to cut spending, this was just the stuff that was said could have been sent in an email. At least the speech from the Secretary of Defense. And Trump's speech, I mean, he could have done it on TV and made the top commanders watch it. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Very expensive and disruptive. When you have the top commanders in places like Korea, Japan, the Middle East, Europe, somewhere on aircraft carriers in the Pacific, and you bring them away from their posts, you're bringing them away from exercises, away from their job, away from defending us in places like the Pacific. Those positions are extremely important for deterring our enemies. And bringing them here is just like our enemies are completely laughing at us right now. Beyond that, the actual talk from the Secretary of War, I'll just start with that, is super humiliating to the 800 generals and admirals who are all more experienced at actually being a warrior than Pete Hegseth. It is a slap in the face coming from someone who has way less experience than all these guys and women. And coming from a man who I'm pretty sure most of these admirals and generals do not respect. I want to just talk a little bit about the whole standards thing, because Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of War, made a big show in his speech about talking about returning to the, quote, male standard for combat jobs. And all the generals and admirals sat there and listened to him. And the American people got to hear him say this. And it's we've also heard it in his nomination hearing, and he's talked about it a lot. And there's not enough pushback to it because what he says and what he implies is just not true. So when Pete Hegseth talks about returning to the male standard for combat jobs, I have to tell you that actually really gets under my skin because I know a lot about this subject. I've lived it. And so I'm going to talk to you about what combat standards actually are. And here's the truth. Since combat roles have been opened to women, there have always been only one standard for those jobs. Okay. I'll start with when combat jobs were first open to women. And this was 1993. This directly affected me because prior to 1993, I was in high school. I wanted to fly fighter jets. I couldn't do it because there was a federal law and Department of Defense policy that said women couldn't do these things. Not because we were not qualified, not because the jet would turn pink, but because we're women and we were not allowed to do it. In 1993, we had a new administration and we had a new Congress. And the Congress rescinded that law and the new administration came in and changed the policy within the Department of Defense to allow all aircraft, not just, prior to 1993, women could fly in the military. They just couldn't fly fighter jets. Okay. They could fly cargo. They could fly helicopters. They couldn't fly pretty much anything with a gun. That was considered combat. Anything with a gun. So after 1993, the Department of Defense changed that, and now all fighter jets were open. Since that point, there were not women's standards and men's standards for fighter jets. It was all one standard. You had to meet the requirements. And this has been true for artillery, for tanks, for submarines as well. So over time, different things opened up. So in 1993, aircraft were opened up, combat surface ships were opened up, but a lot was still closed. Submarines were still closed in the 1990s to women. And what is also called the ground combat arms. So that's your artillery, tanks, combat engineers, infantry, that was still closed. In 2010, submarines were then opened up to women. And again, no standards were lowered. The standards were the same. For submariners, you had to be really smart. You had to meet all kinds of academic requirements to be in subs. And then in 2016, the last bastion of the combat arms, the ground combat arms is what we call it, that was opened up. That's artillery, tanks, infantry, that kind of thing. Now, in that time frame, there's a lot of controversy around the ground combat arms being opened up. And so what the services figured out, the Army and the Marine Corps particularly figured out, is they didn't really have any standards for those jobs. The only standard was you're a man and you get that MOS, you get that job, bam, go do it. With the arrival of women into those jobs prior to 2016, lots of people looked at this and said, we got to have some standards. And so they developed standards that everybody had to meet to become an artilleryman, to become a tanker, to become an infantryman. They developed these standards. And guess what happened? Some men met the standard and some men didn't. Some women met the standard and some women didn't. Saying the standards were lowered is an insult to every woman and man who has served and met those standards that, since they had the standards, have always been equal. Pete Hegseth continues to lie. All right. There is some confusion around this issue still, and the confusion lies around what are called administrative standards. Administrative standards are standards that measure health and fitness. It's based on age. It's based on height and weight for example. Okay. Some of those are based on gender. And I'll talk about this. They're not the same as combat job standards. All the combat job standards have always been the same from day one. I will explain. Now, if Pete Hegseth wants to make everyone in the armed forces all run the same speed and do the same number of pull-ups as a 21-year-old man, that's fine. But I would ask you this. Do we really need to weed out that very talented medic, that linguist, that computer programmer, that radar specialist who can't do 20 pull-ups and an annual fitness test? Why is Pete Hegseth just fine with having different standards for age? Shouldn't we make that 50-year-old colonel meet the same standards as the 20-year-old? Of course not, unless you're really dumb. Admin fitness standards measure overall health, the health of your body, okay? That's why you have different standards based on weight, for example, weight and height and gender. Why? Because a healthy 5'6" woman wouldn't weigh 200 pounds, but a 6'1" man might very well weigh 200 pounds, and they both might be healthy. Okay, because it's a measure of health. That's it. So the run times are a measure of health. All right, that's how the military looks at it. It's not a measure of battlefield performance. Those standards of battlefield performance that are combat standards that Pete Hegseth keeps talking about are set by the job itself. So if you're in the infantry, you have a set across the board standard for training. If you are an artilleryman, you have a set across the board standard to be able to lift a 100-pound artillery round or a certain amount of 100-pound artillery rounds within a certain time. And everybody has to meet that standard, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're 40 years old or 20 years old. Everybody has to meet that standard. If you're a pilot, you've got to be able to swim 1 mile in under 80 minutes while wearing an entire flight suit and gear. Whether you're a man or a woman, you got to be able to do it. Whether you're 6'3" or 5'3", you got to be able to do it. It's one standard. When you're a pilot, you have to be able to jump off of a 12-foot tower and then do an underwater swim for 15 yards. It's a requirement. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or woman or black, white, how old you are, you have to be able to do that standard. Those are combat job specific standards, and they are all equal. So saying standards for combat were lowered for women is just not true at all. And if you want to change all of the standards for the military, including height, weight, and all of the PT standards that we do as a measure of health and fitness for everyone, in my mind, is not making the military more lethal because you're weeding out talent. Our military doesn't exist with just a bunch of 6'1", guys that kick in doors. That may be what people think, but our military exists of lots of different people. We need linguists, as I mentioned. We need people that know how to call in for air support. We need people who are computer programs. We need people who can speak several languages. All of those people need to be healthy and fit for who they are in the military, all right, to do their jobs. So again, I think it's a complete insult to say that we've lowered standards, and it's just not true. And I don't know where he's going with this other than just trying to, I guess, weed out all women from the military. So I want to spend some time right now, again, on Donald Trump's speech to the 800 generals and admirals that he gave at Quantico. It was bonkers. And what we'd heard from Trump was a rambling set of craziness, politicization of the military, and a ton of lies. And here's the problem. We've gotten so used to these lies that we stop calling them out. And there's so many of them, they just come one after another. But because I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, 24 years in uniform, I want to walk through some of these lies, particularly as they pertain to our national security and our military, because these lies aren't harmless. They're about our national security, and truth does matter, or it should. And not enough time is spent anymore pushing back on the lies because we're all just so used to him spewing out false things. So I'm going to go through some of these things because I don't want you to walk away thinking that any of this is even halfway true. All right. So during his speech, Trump claimed that I have settled so many wars since we're here. We're almost 9 months in, and I've settled 7. And yesterday we might have settled the biggest of them all. That's false. He hasn't settled 7 wars. Not even close. I did an entire segment on this show, on this podcast, outlining all of the 7 wars he said he solved and why that claim is false. So I'm not going to go through it all, but you should go back and check it out because it is false. He hasn't solved 7 wars. All right. Second, he said in his speech, quote, "We have the strongest military anywhere in the world." You never heard Biden say that.
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense.
That's a flat out lie. Biden said that all the time. Kamala Harris said that all the time. We do have the strongest military in the world. He's lying. Then he said Biden tried to shut down the Space Force. That's not true. President Biden never said he would get rid of the Space Force. I don't know where he's getting this from. Then Donald Trump claimed that Washington, D.C. was the most dangerous city in America until he fixed it. That's false. He said Portland looked like World War II and that it was burning down. That's false. He said President Biden gave Ukraine $350 billion. That's false. He even claimed that the Congo opened up prisons and sent people here to the United States as migrants. False, people. That did not happen. President Trump said 300,000 Americans died from drug overdoses last year. That is false. The number is very high, but not that high. The real number was about a third of that. President Trump said, quote, "Democrats don't treat veterans and military with respect." It wasn't Democrats who called veterans suckers and losers. And that's not coming from Amy McGrath. That's coming from a lifelong 4-star Marine Corps general. You think he's lying? I don't. Donald Trump told the crowd of generals and admirals, quote, "We had 25 million migrants come in under Biden." That is not true. Donald Trump repeated again that the 2020 election was rigged. That is false. This is the point. In one speech, Donald Trump piled on lie after lie after lie, and most of them were about our military and national security. And it's not just sloppy, it is dangerous. Our country deserves leaders who respect them enough to tell them the truth. Our troops deserve leaders who respect them enough to tell them the truth. Our allies need to know that when America speaks, It's based on reality and not fiction. And our adversaries are watching too. They know the truth. And when they hear these things, they're not intimidated. They are laughing. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everybody in that room knows we do not have a coherent foreign policy or defense policy right now. And that is the bigger issue. Because when truth disappears, so does credibility. And without credibility, America is way weaker.
And if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. Of course, there goes your rank, there goes your future.
Well, here we are yet again, another government shutdown. The federal government shut down at midnight, September 30th, 2025. And for many people, life goes on. Business as usual, not a big deal. But for a lot of our friends and neighbors, it has real impacts. And just for the record, I think no member of Congress should get paid during a government shutdown, period. So who does this hurt? It hurts a lot of people. A lot of people will be furloughed. That means they're on leave without pay. A lot of other folks who are called essential workers will continue to work, but without pay. Okay. And who are we talking about? Well, air traffic controllers, for example, they have to work without a paycheck. And anybody that has to work without a paycheck, that adds a ton of stress to your life. And air traffic controllers already have a pretty difficult job, right? The National Air Traffic Control Association president said that in past shutdowns, some controllers have even had to get side jobs to help pay the bills during these long shutdowns. The president of the Airline Pilots Association said a shutdown threatens the stability of the safest aviation system in the world. So in my mind, if there is an air traffic control incident during this time, we know who to blame. This stuff is just completely dumb. The military has to continue to work, of course. They don't get any pay. Transportation Security Administration, those folks that help you in the airport with your security, they're not getting paid. They still have to work. VA, you'll still get, if you're a veteran, you'll still get health care, but a lot of the VA benefit offices will be closed. GI benefit assistance offices will be closed. National Park will have a huge impact on our national parks. 64% of National Park Service employees are going to be furloughed. That means if you had a trip to a national park, you might as well not go. And the other problem is you might not have a trip to, I don't know, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky scheduled for October, but a lot of the communities around these national parks, I mean, they are dependent on this tourism. So when the parks are shut down and people don't come, all of the community suffers, okay? The House of Representatives Speaker Mike Johnson warned on Monday at the White House that FEMA, quote, won't be funded during a shutdown. That should be interesting as we head into hurricane season. Over time during these shutdowns, there's going to be more and more strain on the services that we need. So, for example, meat and poultry inspections. That's pretty important. You know, those types of things really matter. I have been and lived in countries where there isn't a whole lot of regulation of food and there isn't a whole lot of inspections. And let me just tell you, and you should ask a veteran if they've had any experiences with this, but I just got to tell you, it's not fun. Okay. And it's something we rely on here in America, and we should rely on it. Things like mine clearing operations, housing aid, rural development programs, all of that stuff is just going to be halted, and it's terribly wasteful. Every time we do this, we waste more taxpayer money. This costs taxpayers billions of dollars, primarily because you have to pay the furloughed federal workers later on for time that they did not work. How efficient is that? The last Trump term, we had a big, long government shutdown. You might remember. The Congressional Budget Office during that time was over a month. The shutdown, I think, was over a month. The Congressional Budget Office at that time, CBO, estimated that that shutdown reduced the gross domestic product of the United States of America by $3 billion, a permanent loss to the economy. And we never got that back. That's what that means. We never got that $3 billion back. In 2019, there was a Senate report that came out, and it calculated that the last three shutdowns, we had one in 2013 and in 18 and in 19, wasted nearly $4 billion in taxpayer money. A shutdown costs, this was the last time, it's probably gone up now, but the last time we had a shutdown during the first Trump administration, it cost roughly $400 million per day just in compensation for furloughed employees back then. So it amazes me that all this talk within this administration and within Republicans going after fraud, waste, and abuse, that these guys continually shoot us in the feet. This is such a colossal waste of taxpayer money. And my thing is, you can't be a member of Congress and continue to get paid when the government is shut down. If everybody else that works for the government is not being paid, you should not be getting paid. You could be like an essential worker. Okay, that's fine with me. You be an essential worker, you continue to work, but you don't get paid, just like the military. I think most Americans would agree to that.
Amen. Amen.
But before we go, I have one shout out for you today. A Polish skier made history as the first person to climb Mount Everest and ski down Mount Everest without an oxygen tank. This is pretty incredible. And I'm going to butcher his name. It's Andrzej Bargi. He's from Poland. He's 37 years old. He left the Everest Base Camp in Nepal on September 19th. He climbed through camps 1 and 2 and 3, and he did a 16-hour climb to camp 4 on September 21st. That's through the mountain's, quote, death zone. It's about 8,000 meters from sea level, where oxygen levels are so low. He reached the summit on September 22nd. And one of the things you can go online and see, there's lots of clips. He had some video that people were videoing him while he was doing it. It's really an incredible achievement, and it's unprecedented because it's never been done. Also, the climb that he made to the top of Mount Everest in the fall, apparently that is also not unprecedented, but highly unusual because it's a very dangerous time. So cheers to you, Andrzej, for that incredible feat of climbing Mount Everest and skiing down without oxygen. All right, everybody. That was a great show. My first that was alone and unafraid here. And there's a lot going on. I hope to see you again next week. Until then, take care.